Perfect. Okay, so we've got the CLE number for the course on the screen in front of you, and we have two wonderful partners, presenters here today to discuss with us the present and future of brand marketing, adapting and innovating to the age of COVID-19. So first up, we have Po Yi with over 2 decades of experience in private practice and in-house. Po provides cross-purpose, multidisciplinary legal counseling on transactional and regulatory matters in advertising, entertainment, and media. She frequently acts as a strategic advisor to clients in developing content-based entertainment marketing programs and works closely with them in executing such programs, including negotiating talent, venue, production, distribution, media, and sponsorship agreements, as well as advising clients on all things legal and compliance matters as it relates to advertising and marketing. Po was formerly the Vice President and Chief Advertising Counsel for a major financial services company in the credit card industry, where she served as legal counsel to the company's Chief Marketing Officer and supported brand and product marketing activities throughout the company. She is now currently a partner at Manet, Phelps and Phillips. So thanks for joining us, Po. We're excited for you to be here today. And then we have Michelle. Michelle has 30 years of being an entertainment, media, and technology attorney working in LA and both here in Austin. She's represented clients across a spectrum of industries for film and TV to toys, games, and privacy rights and technology. She's helped develop, finance, market, and distribute thousands of hours of entertainment and was a pioneer in using digital theatrical distribution to showcase event cinema in movie theaters across the globe. She's a co-founder of UT Austin's immersive media program and frequently works with live action, animation, XR, and gaming clients. Most recently, Michelle worked with the Walton family of Walmart fame to develop programming for Blake Street, their social club, focused on wellness. She has designed and produced over 150 holistic events founded on all forms of wellness. Michelle serves on multiple boards and is currently the vice chair of Aslaba. She's the president of the board of the Forklift Dance Works and programming chair for Women in Toys Licensing and Entertainment. Thank you both for joining us today. I'm really excited to learn more about this topic. I know it's something that I don't practice largely in, and so Michelle, I'm going to hand it over to you, and thank you again.
Great, thank you, Alice. Appreciate that. So I'm just going to end the poll and report on it. So we have mostly lawyers, about 75% are lawyers, and then I'd say we're kind of spread evenly between brand, agency, and other. So that'll sort of frame in who's out there and what we're talking about. We did want to start off by defining what it is that we're talking about. So as we look at experiential marketing, and I'm going to read it, experiential marketing is a strategy that engages consumers using branded experiences. Sometimes referred to as live marketing or event marketing experience, the idea is to create a memorable impact on the consumer, one that will inspire them to share with their friends both online and offline. It might include an event, a part of an event, or a pop-up activation not tied to any event. So this type of marketing is focused on getting the consumer to experience the brand. And so as we launch into that, I'm going to quickly share my screen and show you a beautiful ecosystem graphic that Po has created. And we'll just say in the beginning that, you know, we're the lawyers, so don't expect anything beautiful. Please just, there you go. Go back. There we go. So start us off a little bit, Po, and kind of talk about give us the framework of who's involved in this kind of brand marketing.
Sure. And first of all, thank you, Alice and Michelle, for inviting me to speak here. I'm really looking forward to having this dialogue with Michelle and hopefully with the other participants here who are joining us today. I have to say, this is such an exciting area. It was exciting before COVID. It's exciting today. It will continue to be exciting. And to talk about experiential marketing or brand marketing, you really need to think about who the players are. The ecosystem is quite broad. So what I try to do, and again, this is my non-artistic way of describing what I understand to be the ecosystem in my mind, and I'll take you through that. So at the heart of all of this, you have the brand. it's the brand who wants to participate in whatever the marketing activity may be. It has to be part of the strategy. And in order for a brand to bring this to life, it needs to work with a lot of different players. And the players that I have described here are only, I wouldn't say it's a complete list of players, but it's certainly the players that you would typically see when we're talking about experiential marketing. So on the one hand, you have the marketing partner. The marketing partner could be another brand. It could be a sport property or entertainment property. It could be a media company. It could be any kind of marketing. Anybody who's sort of working with you to make this work. So you have the marketing partner, and then you have, not always, but you may have talent. The talent may be part of the marketing partner, or the talent can be independently hired by either the brand or the marketing partner to participate in experiential marketing. This talent could be celebrities. The talent could be influencers. And it may even involve maybe consumers who are wanting to be considered talent for this particular experiential marketing campaign. And then you have social media platforms. And the reason why I have the social media platforms a little bit out there is because it's a way to amplify what you're doing, right? You never do just experiential marketing alone, which in most cases prior to COVID was primarily in person. But in person, just by the way it is limited in number of people who it can touch. But the way to amplify that experience is to use social media, which is the reason why you see a lot of social media or influencers being part of these kind of campaigns. So social media is a big part of it. It could also be traditional media. Could be media that's kind of carrying the streaming of the experience, or in other ways. And just media is a very big part of any kind of marketing because it's a way to amplify the experience. And then you have vendors. Vendors could be agencies. Vendors could be technology platforms. Vendors can be vendors of the brand, vendors of the marketing partner, vendors of the agency that the brand or the marketing partner is working with. So it could be really, it's a pretty large group of companies. And then you have the venue. The venue will be the location. The location doesn't necessarily play in. So it could be the location could actually be the brand's own offices, retail space, or it could be a parking lot. It could be arena, part of the marketing part that you're working with. It could really be anything. So, but as you can see, these are the basic, I would say, members of the participants of the ecosystem when we're talking about experiential marketing.
Myself, good. Can the rest of you see Poe and I, or are you just seeing the main screen? Alice, or maybe you lead our tech person.
We're seeing your screen at the moment that you're sharing.
Okay, so let me stop sharing the screen. We'll jump back to that if we need to. And I'm gonna. Great. Okay, so we're gonna start and basically say. So one of the things that Poe, that you outlined the whole thing, but kind of the background, let's say almost even the white space, is the consumer, right? So all of this happens against the background of who that consumer is. And so talk to us a little bit about what are the things that are important to understand vis-a-vis these relationships, right? So as we're thinking about, where's the cost, where's the reward, where's the risk? So talk about that a little bit.
And it's really important to understand what the relationships are. And before a brand engages in any kind of experiential marketing, the brand really has to know who the players are. And then before knowing who the players are, the brand will also have to assign responsibilities and obligations to each player, because that's important for cost purposes, to define where the cost, how the budget will be managed. But it's also important for purposes of liability. You need to figure out, you need to find out who's going to be liable for, who's responsible for it, and who's ultimately going to bear the risk in the event there is a problem. So the only way you can understand that is understanding, again, who is contracting with whom, and under that contract, who is responsible for paying whom, and who is responsible if something goes wrong. So really understanding it. Sometimes it's good to have like even create a little chart and figure out what each party is doing. Without that, it could be very easy to lose the sight of what's important, and then you could have some cracks that you would need to fill kind of last minute, and that's not a situation that you want to be in.
So one of the things that we talked about is that there's a lot that's kind of been worked out already in experiential marketing, but one of the impacts of COVID is that it's illustrated the types of things that you have to focus a little bit more on. So we're all kind of maybe rethinking and looking at stuff. And so if we very high level look at what's changed for brand marketing due to COVID, what are the top couple of things that you think are the major trends that are affecting how everything else is working?
Well, remember, experiential marketing, almost by definition, required in-person interaction. Well, you can't do that anymore, right? Very few places are having anything in person, even if you're not under a complete lockdown. I mean, for several months, we were all under a complete lockdown and we couldn't do anything, and everybody was trying to figure out what to do next. What do we do with all the money that we paid? What do we do with all the marketing investment we already made? It's just suspended. Everything was suspended. And then, after a few months, everybody was trying to figure out, well, now that this has become the new norm, how do we work given the limitations we know today? Just because we can't have in-person interaction does not mean that experiential marketing has to completely, or brand marketing has to completely come to a halt. There are ways to adapt to the new reality or the new normal. And the one way to do that is, of course, the digital transformation. For many, many years, we were all talking about how everybody, doesn't matter whether you're in entertainment, whether you're a technology company, whether you're a brick and mortar retail company, whether you're a bank, it doesn't matter. Everybody was going through digital transformation. We lawyers have been going through digital transformation for a while. And in fact, I have to tell you that for many, many years, all our tech people have been saying, can you please make sure that you digitize everything and try not to print everything out? Well, as a lawyer, we don't like to do that. I like to look at things on paper. But I can tell you in my own personal life, I have gotten to a point where I hardly print anything. I am doing everything digitally. Same thing with marketing. What has happened is that there was already a trend of digital transformation, but this COVID situation has accelerated that trend, and that accelerated the digital transformation and digitization of everything. And that's true with marketing. Now, with marketing, instead of having in-person interaction, we're still able to have interactive engagement, but it would be more virtual, right? There are some in-person things that are happening right now, but in most cases, it has become a virtual world. Just like today, we would be normally sitting around, right, in a conference room, having this very intimate discussion. Can't do that anymore. So instead, we're doing it on Zoom or some other video conferencing platform. So again, marketers, like all of us, are figuring out ways to adapt, and that really is the key change that has happened because of COVID. There have been other shifts as well. Now that we are kind of using digital technology for everything, so there's a greater reliance on technology. We have to make sure that Wi-Fi is working well. We have to make sure that technology is scalable. We have to make sure that data is something that we can use. And in fact, data has always been important, has become even more important. With that comes privacy and data security issues. All those things that we knew were important have become even more important. They have become much more central to everything that we do, especially in marketing. So you have to really worry about the privacy issues. And then, really, when you're shifting the in-person experience to a virtual experience, everybody has to get used to the platform. There are pros and cons. I wouldn't say there are only cons. I think there are some positive advantages to having a virtual platform. For example, I think in many ways, virtual is much more scalable, right? You don't have to rely on social media in order to get more people involved. Virtual allows brands to reach more people by creating a platform where more and more people can participate. There are really fewer barriers to entry. So I think all those things are real big changes in brand marketing.
So let's sort of stay on that technology platform place for a minute and talk a little bit more about that. So I think what we're seeing overall is that this is kind of how things were, and COVID and quarantine and social unrest has sort of shoved us harder and faster into the future. And we're looking at basically technologies and platforms that maybe didn't exist or weren't widely used. Zoom went public, and I will say my nephew is now a millionaire because he worked for Zoom in Silicon Valley. And Hopin is looking at getting a $2 billion valuation as it launches. More virtual event platforms are raising money. I'll do a little shout out for Austin's own AA Labs that has developed a proprietary technology platform. So we're kind of seeing, like, if we looked at our ecosystem and we had the, media and social marketing, we've seen the rise of things that didn't either used to exist or weren't as important. And so now those are becoming more a part of what you have to look at. And then broadly, at the same time, we're seeing kind of a lot of insecurity and tension around the existing platforms. TikTok is like are you going to be there? Are you not? Did the government take you over or not? So people are leaving that platform. So talk a little bit about kind of in this new world where, some platforms are now, in our frame of reference and others are kind of dropping out. What should that make you be thinking about? What red flag?
Well, I think because so many of these platforms are new and untested, especially when it comes to marketing, you have to be, I think brands have to be, and lawyers involved and supporting the brands have to be mindful of potential hazards, potential things that could go wrong because you haven't really tested it. So you haven't, I think everybody, to some extent, at least in the beginning, is more accommodating if there is a problem, because again, things are untested. So in many ways, I would say Plan B is always a good thing to do. And the planning is everything. Whether you are negotiating with a technology vendor or negotiating with talent who may be known as a TikTok talent, and now with whatever is going on right now with TikTok coming from our president, and then now it's in the hands of a judge in terms of whether TikTok can continue to be a viable a social media platform, video sharing platform in the United States. So we have to be careful about not locking up, locking into just one platform. Because if there is a problem, you have to be able to quickly shift to another platform. So for example, if you're dealing with talent and you have a deal with a talent influencer and just say, you want to post X, Y, and Z, 5 posts on TikTok, you have to be quickly able to say, but in the event that TikTok doesn't work or TikTok is no longer available, you have to shift to something else, right? So all those things, I think all of us have to become, we don't have a crystal ball. We have no idea what tomorrow holds, but all we can do is when we are dealing with these uncertainties, the contracts that you have with each of these participants in the ecosystem that we talked about earlier, we have to build in flexibility as well as Plan B and sort of a crisis management and how to deal with things, if something were to go wrong. And that's what happens. Anytime you're doing sort of even in person and anytime you're doing sort of live event, you have to be almost like be in a war room mindset to be able to quickly pivot, quickly shift your thinking, and quickly plug any holes that you see.
Are you seeing that? So it's kind of at the first stage, you're drafting a contract and kind of getting as many rights as possible and building the, in the event that this happens. What are you finding is the case is sort of it's happening, in real time, right? Like there's a holy shit moment. And it's, there isn't any, the Plan B is not specified. And then you have to try to figure out how, you're in that war room and you have to try to figure out how are we responding in the moment. And is that you can try to negotiate in advance, or that's just
No, you need to negotiate everything in advance. I think that we all have to be seers. And think about what could potentially go wrong and make sure that we have plan B for everything. So for example, if you're negotiating, there are a couple of things you need to think about. You need to think about if something were to go wrong, what can you do in pulling that away from the problematic element of your campaign, whether it is a technology, whether it is a social media platform, whether it's something else, whether it's talent who can't come because the talent suddenly contracted COVID, right? There are all these possibilities. We just don't know what's going to happen. So you have to be able to pull whatever the campaign responsibility that they all had away from them and find an alternate solution. And so contractually, you need to have, reserve for yourself the right to pull that back. Secondly, that's actually the number one thing to do, right? So that you have control, you maintain control in the event there's a problem. So it's like self-help, right? The other thing that you need to think about is, what about the cost? Then you first think about who's going to pay for the extra money. Who's going to pay? What are you going to do? Do you still have to pay them? Do you get any money back? Did you already pay them? Is there any clawback provision? So you need to really think about the pain, the monetary, the financial issue if something like that were to happen.
Yeah, and I love the ecosystem map, because it's almost like as you look at each one of those components, you're having to think, what is my plan B for the venue? What's my plan B if the vendors? What's my plan B if the talent? And you're thinking through all the places in which you've got to anticipate that something's going to go wrong. I think in a way what COVID has done is illustrated how much can go wrong.
Yeah.
And, that's always a lawyer practice, which is, I'm sure it'll be lovely, but let's just think about if it's not, and then how do you build that in?
I totally agree. I mean, I can't tell you how many times when I would tell my client, say, well, what's your plan B? And the client would look at me and go, what plan B? We don't want to think about plan B because it's going to work. Well, I don't think I will be hearing that from anybody anymore. I think if there's one thing that this COVID has taught us, which is that no one can predict the future and the unthinkable can happen. So all we can do as lawyers is to sort of help our clients figure out what that potential problem might be, not knowing what the problem might be, and then figure out how we can resolve issues that arise because of this unforeseen act.
So I wanted to focus a little bit on kind of specific, I'll say, industries that are part of experiential marketing, a lot of which is very relevant to Austin folks. In fact, I sort of use South by as the default definition for experiential marketing. I looked at the list of South by events from 2019, it was everything from Audible doing a medieval setup in one of the bars on Rainy Street where you could even put your head and hands in stocks and, drink medieval food, to the anniversary of Batman where they took over Congress Avenue Bridge where the bats come out every night and made that a part of it and had a public art mural. So let's look specifically at some of those areas. So music has been a big space for brands to do partnering, ACL, the music festival is a great example. What are you seeing happening in the music business, and how are people managing their agreements in that space where, again, the norm isn't really there yet?
Well, I mean, I think music has, I think holding live music events is not happening. I know that there have been some rave and unauthorized events popping up in different parts of the United States and the world. But I think live events are, at least for the time being, dead. But that doesn't mean that you can't have music, right? Music is not something that necessarily relies on live performance, although there is a different experience if you have a live performance than if you're just, looking at it or just listening to it or looking at it visually. But music still is a big part of brand marketing. I mean, there are brands who are reaching out and partnering with musicians and with performers to create events that are related to, that celebrate music and then use the music to deliver a message. So I think it's still happening, but I think it's just that the options are not as wide as it used to be, right? The options are much more limited in what you can do with music. if this continues much longer, maybe there will be additional sort of interesting things that happen with music. But for the time being, I think it's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate, but having live performances that kind of creates a special atmosphere that oftentimes brands use as part of their in-person experiential marketing, that's kind of dead.
Well, I know we're seeing, I'll call them pilot programs. You know, people here in Austin are doing something where, you know, they're out in a field and the band is on top of the camper and people are, you know, kind of tailgating. But kind of to your point, it's not super scalable yet.
Right. But I think what you will see is much more innovation in terms of personalization with music.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. So the one positive, and we talked about that there are sometimes positives to what's going on today, and that's the use of data. That's the use of the ability to personalize the experience, because in person it's much harder to do. I suppose you could do sort of virtual even when you're in person. But I think if you have a digital platform, then you are able to create a real personal experience, and you know, I'm not sure how close we are to being able to do that for really everyone, but that is a potential, that's a possibility in terms of, you know, all of this and being able to personalize you know, in each person, each consumer's experience with the brand, with the music, and with everything else that's involved.
Well, and then I'll look at both sports and esports. And so sports have gone, you know, say kind of pilot programs, right? The NBA in a bubble, and it's not all the way back, but they're doing something. And then contrasting that with esports, which is already, you know, they're not doing in-person giant events in Cologne, Germany anymore, but they were already on that platform. So what do you see happening? And is more money and more brand sponsorships shifting to the esports place? Already digital and already have an audience that understands, you know, how to use that and how to be in that space?
I think I don't think that you will. I don't think sports sponsorship will go away. I think the brands will continue to pour money into sports, because sports, while there may not be the audience, right? People who are going to these sporting events, there's still games happening and there's media, right? People are still very, very engaged with sports. And that's probably why you see probably a lot more sports betting companies doing very well, right? I think sports is still a very big part of our lives. So I don't think the brands will stop doing things with sports. I think sports will continue to, you know, with sports teams, sports leagues, they will continue to bring money, attract money and participation from brands. I think the activations that brands oftentimes negotiated for as part of their sponsorship that happens in stadium or at the event, those things obviously cannot happen today. So they will have to move digitally. So they'll have to create more virtual activations. But there are also, you know, some additional media opportunities that are being created because everything is streamed. There are opportunities with sports where you can see people's, you know, the seats have now become sort of almost like an advertising inventory, right? So there are creative things that can happen with sports sponsorship. So I don't think that's going to go away. I don't think necessarily. And again, I am not a marketer. I am not sitting there with the CMOs and then thinking where they're going to spend the money. But esports was already growing, and that's going to continue to grow. That I don't think, again, is going to take money away from sports necessarily. Esports is just where, you know, certain demographic is going to the esports. And I think that if you really want to reach those customers, that you really have to be in esports. And I think esports is much easier to adapt to the virtual world because they're already in the virtual world, right? I mean, I have two kids and they both play video games. And this idea of not being able to see their friends in person, they do it through video games. So when it comes to the video games and esports, I think that the fact that we are not able to hold in-person events doesn't necessarily affect them too much. Although, like you said, you know, there were these big events happening with esports that can't happen right now. But you know, when that comes back, that'll come back too.
Well, one of the things that I've seen, I'm an F1 fan, and so they have a limited season, but in a way, maybe one of the make goods for brands is that they've shifted really hard into the esports space that was already going. And so now you have team drivers competing, in the Formula One video game and drawing a bunch of attention, because now instead of it being esports athletes playing the F1 game, it's the F1 drivers doing it directly. So it kind of added a new thing that they could offer to people is, we're gonna include this piece in your package as well. So we're probably gonna.
Yeah, I think they did that with the NBA, right? I think the NBA players actually did that before the season started when they were still quarantining. So that is happening. I don't think that it makes them actually better players. I think the esports players are probably better than the actual athletes themselves playing like the NBA 2K. But yes, there are so many, I think, possibilities when you're dealing with virtual, and you're right. You talked about make goods. That is a discussion that everybody's having, right? When you are not able to hold events the way sponsors thought that they were supposed to be held, and the value of the money, the millions of dollars they're spending with these sports leagues or sports teams, that was predicated on in-person, and then with activations, all those things will now have to go into sort of the make good category. And what make goods are sufficient, right? I think most contracts have language that says that make goods would have to be mutually acceptable. But nobody knows. I mean, well, not nobody knows. They are working on it. Everybody's working on what those make goods can look like. And I think a lot of those make goods are coming in the form of virtual events, or social media, or some digital events that can happen.
So let's talk a little bit about the kind of realities of production, because that's another space where you're kind of allocating risk and cost. I actually got to see Poe when she was speaking at the UCLA Entertainment Law Institute, and they had all the heads of the studios, and the guilds have created a production guide for COVID called the Safe Way Forward. And I have started to see other organizations and other, advertising, other productions adopting that as the method. So is that something where, if like you're a brand and you're hiring a production partner, are you starting to stipulate that they have to follow those guidelines, or how are we seeing people govern the risk around, production and whether or not people are going to be infected and what's coming out of that?
So what I am seeing with my clients that are that they suspended all production for a while, they have definitely resumed the production. But what I am seeing is agencies that are the creative agencies that are managing these productions for brands coming back and saying, we need to amend our agreement with you, or enter into a separate SOW, some language, some document that addresses the COVID situation and the production issues relating to COVID. So for example, you're right. Everybody knows about the production guidelines and that you have to comply with all that. Everybody knows that there has to be some kind of a COVID czar, right? Who's going to be responsible for making sure that everybody complies with the protocol that's created. There are changes that need to be made in terms of the number of people that from the brand that can go and watch and participate in these productions. And then here's the thing. What we talked about earlier about the liability and the risk allocation. Now there's a clause in there in a lot of these contracts that specifically say, in the event the production gets shut down or delayed for any reason, we, meaning the agency, they are not liable. They can go forward and pay for the production. These are costs these are non-cancelable costs. Even if something suddenly shuts down, it's not their responsibility. So I'm seeing agencies getting really, really hung up on this particular issue of making sure that they are not left holding, getting all the, assuming the risk of shutdown of the production. And brands, for the most part, understand that that's the case, right? It's no one's fault. So they have to be prepared for that, which means that when brands are purchasing media, because media is purchased in, ahead, right? So the media campaigns, the cycle that they use for purposes of purchasing media and getting the creative ready to put in there, they have to be careful about making sure that they're that in the event that there is a shutdown and then they can't produce the content they wanted to produce, that they again have plan B.
So does that all trickle down? And, so the brand is pushing on the agency and the agency pushes on the production. Like who's left holding the bag? Is that the one?
No, the brand is. The brand has to pay for any problems with the shutdown or delays and costs associated with that. In many cases, that will really depend on the negotiation, but it would be unfair to have the agency be responsible for those extra costs because the agency had nothing to do with it. I think what is important for the brand is to know what those costs may be, to be able to plan ahead, right? So we don't want it to be, brands are not going to want to have the agencies agree to pay X dollars that cannot be clawed back.
Right.
To the extent that it can be clawed back, right? So just be careful about making sure that there are different stages that happen. But it's an ongoing conversation. I think the risk allocation is always a very big issue when negotiating the SOWs amongst the brand, the production company, and the agencies.
And one of the other things that we want to talk about, so at the same time as, global pandemic and quarantine, we've seen the rise of Black Lives Matter and social justice movements. So as brands are looking at, what's my responsibility or opportunity to do something more than post a black square on Instagram, what is it that brands are looking like? What are the concerns from that perspective? If you wanted to get involved and kind of support a social justice cause, I think we all have Kendall Jenner with a Pepsi in our head is like, you got to watch out. So what are you telling your clients in terms of if they want to get involved in something that's very, like a justice movement?
Well, several issues there. The first issue, I think, anytime I think the brand should be applauded, right, for wanting to participate in that and be part of the social conversation. But at the same time, if you decide to enter the conversation, then the brand has to be responsible for the fallout from the conversation. So because you can't really, you can't make everyone happy, or you may just trip up, even though your intentions are good, but the way it was executed may not be the way it should have been executed. So whenever that happens, it's really important and this is true in all cases, anytime there is a marketing campaign, a very, very important partner to the brand, as part of the brand, would be their PR folks or crisis management. It's important to get the PR folks involved, whether it's internal or external. It's important to make sure that the people whose job is to sort of think about these issues are involved from the get-go. Another issue that you need to be thinking about is if the brand is doing something it's sort of cause-related, then you have to be thinking about cause-related marketing issues. There are states have laws that specifically relate to companies participating in some campaign that purports to donate, that trigger some kind of a donation to a charity or to a charitable cause as part of this campaign. In some cases, depending on how it's done and what state, there are some registration requirements. There's a contract requirement. There's disclosure requirements. So it's not good enough just because you want to be able to do this. You can't just do it. You really need to be very careful about how you do it, and it's important to make sure that proper attorneys are involved in making sure that when a brand is doing something like this, some kind of a cause-related marketing, that cause-related marketing is reviewed from the start as the brand is structuring that kind of campaign.
And I would say that's an area where a lot of folks aren't aware that there's legal things you need to be complying with. So that's a big red flag. So in this space, it's kind of finding an authentic partner. I'm thinking about Ben & Jerry's. That's very on brand for Ben & Jerry's to take a position. No one's surprised or upset that they're doing that. So that due diligence, is it a good fit? And then I like your note, basically they have to be prepared to, deal with the consequences, because there are going to be some people who are like, I'm not buying Chunky Monkey anymore. And so I'm done with you. I'm going to call them Tom and Jerry's.
Right, and I think that you bring up a good point about due diligence. This is true not just with Black Lives Matter or some of social cause, social justice, but you also have to just think about anytime you're dealing with a partner, whether it's with talent or whether it's a property, entertainment property, or sports property, or anybody else, especially if they're consumer facing, that you do proper due diligence to make sure that there are not potential red flags in terms of hurting or harming the brand. Reputational risk is something that you need to be thinking about. And then also make sure that there is, and I'm sure everybody here on this Zoom call knows about the term, morals clause. It's not necessarily always a morals clause, but it's important to have some way to address issues that come up that may be off-brand, that may be inconsistent with what you're trying to do, so that you can terminate the participation of either the talent or the partner who may potentially be harming the brand by your association with them.
And so I want to ask about that a little bit more, because I'm usually on the other side. And so if I saw morals clause in as I was representing talent or somebody, I would be like, that's so squishy, right? But at the same time, that's kind of what the brand wants, is the ability, like, we don't want to have to prove a case or show that you did. So does it mostly wind up that it just is, the brand saying this is inconsistent with, what we were looking for, or
not always. It's highly negotiated. I always advise my clients to be specific, because if you're dealing with anybody who knows what they're doing, they're not going to accept just a very squishy, very broad morals clause. And also there's a trend of making these morals clauses mutual, bilateral. So it's not just whatever you may be asking the talent may be asking the brand the same thing. Right, because there are also potential issues with the brand being involved in some kind of a scandal, and the talent himself or herself is a brand, right? So the talent does not want to be associated with a brand that may be a partnering brand that may be potentially, creating a reputational harm for the talent, and that is true with properties, with marketing partners. Right, the marketing partners, everybody who's involved, they would have to be very careful about this. On the other hand, when you look at the ecosystem, the players who may not be public facing, the technology vendors necessarily, you don't typically see a morals clause. However, you could definitely see some kind of clause in there about, violation of law, or them getting involved in something that becomes public that could potentially, create reputational harm for not just reputational harm, but potential, legal liability for the brand. So yeah, moral clauses. I think it's something, and I shouldn't be calling it morals clauses, because it's not really a morals clause necessarily. I think people that use that term generally, but it is something that everyone in the ecosystem has to be aware of and has to think about. Whether you actually include it or not, you can decide at that point. But it is an area that everybody needs to at least think about.
Great, and I'll just encourage, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I've got another kind of big question for Poe, and then we can get to audience Q&A. So this is the grand summary question, right? So, past was 2019, and there's, 80 million things happening at South by, and it's full tilt. And I think I saw some industry research that projected that 2020 was going to, have massive growth, and we've seen that not happen in the present moment, where people are kind of figuring out how to make it work. So if we look at the future, if you had a hypothetical crystal ball, kind of how far can you see? And what are we seeing as sort of structural changes that will still be in place even when we, get to come outside again?
I would hate to be the person being asked to look in the crystal ball, because I will tell you, January 1st, 2020, I can't tell you how excited I was. I just love the number 2020. It just looked perfect, right? And I'm so excited about it. And look what happened. But then on the other hand, you keep telling yourself, well, what else can go wrong? 2021 has to be better than 2020. I think that I think that I'm a pretty optimistic person, and you have to be always looking at the bright side. And I've had plenty of negative sort of thoughts, but on the bright side, I have to say that the acceleration of technology, or the use of technology, the digitalization, digital transformation, that is here to stay. I don't see that going away. I think that these video conferencing platforms are here to stay. I think that you will start to see more creative use of video conferencing platforms for marketing purposes, which it's in the very early stages of that. So we haven't seen enough innovation in the application of the technology that has grown exponentially in 2020. So I think we'll start to see a lot of that. So it just becomes another option, right, for companies, for brands to be using another tool that they can use to communicate to their customers and their target audience. So I think that's here to stay. I have to tell you that until this year, until video conferencing became like the thing, a lot of my clients I never saw. I would never see, we would just get on the phone. But now we all actually prefer to do a Zoom call unless we have a complete Zoom fatigue or some other video conferencing fatigue, whether it's Microsoft Teams or whatever it is. I'm starting to see more of now I know what my clients look like, all of them. And so there's, again, positive to that. So I think that is definitely not going to change. I wonder, a part of me wonders whether as the COVID situation is somehow put under control sometime in 2021, whether people may go the other way, people who are just so fed up with doing everything digitally, that they may crave that in-person action, and whether there will be an explosion of the in-person personal touch gathering that all of us have missed so much. So I can see that happening, and it'll be interesting to see what companies do and what people do. But I, for myself, if I'm able to go and not have to worry about COVID, yeah, I would love to do that. I would love to be able to just sit down and talk to people. So I don't know. I think that you may see some creative ways of using that that yearning that people have, and seeing that in marketing.
So I've worked a bunch in the past with this woman, Mary Puffenroth, who is a scientist who deals with ordinary fear. And so she was speculating that what we might see is that high touch in-person experience is going to be something that's worth it, right? Like it's not worth it to yes, right? But it would be worth it to go to a gathering of 100 influential thinkers where, you know what I mean? So you're going to be making choices around in person, whereas before that was the default easy method. And now it's going to be like, that's the cherry, like that's reserved, and you're selecting the times and the occasions in which you're going to show up in person, because you are now making, you know, even if things get resolved, like I know it's going to be really hard for me to go back to a place and not be thinking, oh God, people are breathing on me, stop it. So making choices, you know, around the high value of an in-person, and understanding too that if people are making that choice, then the event producers and brands are understanding that you really got to make it worth your while.
I think all of us have learned to appreciate the value of in-person interaction and not really take it for granted anymore, right? I think I used to take it for granted, but not anymore. If I'm able to have that in-person, like you said, high-touch interaction, people will make it worthwhile. I think people will make sure that they're going to be using that time wisely. So in many ways, that's a positive development. I can't say that's a negative development.
Yeah. All right, so we have a good question for you. In terms of looking at a plan B in contracts, are you seeing specific drafting of a backup plan, such as a backup SOW, or just more general clauses that outline an intention in good faith to amend services as needed? So are we like creating a whole lot?
I'm seeing both.
Both. Okay.
I think to the extent that you are able to have a specific backup plan, I advise my clients to do so, because it's always better to negotiate if you know what it is that you're talking about. Like, so for example, COVID is no longer, it's not a force majeure event. Everybody knows what's happening with this. So there are ways to plan around it. So I think if you're able to provide some specificity in terms of plan B, it's worth doing it. But then you need to have plan C, right? So that's when I would also put in some catch-all way to negotiate for, in good faith, mutually agree upon something that, if plan B doesn't work out, then plan C is to be agreed to, down the road.
Not just your catch-all. We're gonna
exactly
huddle up and figure out how to make it work.
Don't leave anything to chance. It's not worth leaving anything to chance.
And then are you putting, like, so let's say you're at plan C, which is the squishy negotiate in good faith. Was that something you'd put a ticking clock on? Like the parties have to, you only have 10 days to figure it out, or something that makes
Not always. I think a lot of clients don't, we also have time issues, right? People want to negotiate, people want to get deals done. So, what I'm seeing is that a lot of companies, a lot of partners, marketing partners are agreeing to. There are two different ways of doing it. One is to just say we're going to have a long-term relationship no matter what. So let's just agree later on. Another thing I'm seeing is putting some kind of a time period there, and let that time period be, if that doesn't happen, then giving sort of the nuclear option of termination. And in the event of the termination, what would be the, what's the effect of termination, or what happens to the fees that have not accrued yet? So there are things that then need to be negotiated. And that is something, again, to the extent that you can be specific about the liquidated damages, about make goods, about the effect of termination effect, I would absolutely advise my clients to put that in there.
Yeah, exactly. And then I have a question for you, just because I think it's really interesting how people get to where they are. So, here you are, and you're a maven in the advertising marketing space. Was there a point in your career, either as a non-lawyer or a lawyer, where you were like, this is the place I want to be, and I want to do this work? Was there an aha moment where you're like, yes, I want to be in this space?
I love content. And I love communication. I think maybe I love communication more than content. I've always been, ever since I was little, and I would say especially in college, I just wanted to be in a field where it was related to communication, because I was always fascinated by the stories that people tell or how people communicate. There's just something, it sounds kind of amorphous, but I was always really interested in the news, in information, in the channel of communication. So advertising is that, right? Advertising is about how do you communicate the differentiation of your product to the consumers? How do you message all of that? In fact, I love communication so much that before I went to law school, I was in PR. Right after college, I was doing financial PR, and I was writing press releases. I was responsible for, working with my clients and coming up with some kind of a strategy for, PR strategy, communication strategy. So you can see, I think while I didn't really plan it, everything that I was doing is kind of following the idea of communication. So when I went to law school, I wanted to continue with the communication theme, and I love content, and I happen to come from a pretty musical family. So, I did entertainment, I did advertising, and I did a lot of media related work, and here I am. It's all about following that theme of communication, and what kind of communication it is doesn't really matter. I am fascinated by content and how content gets distributed and created and distributed.
Well, and this is a plug for the lawyers in the room, basically, is that as like I always feel like, particularly in a contract space, is that's an act of creation as well, right? Like,
oh, totally.
Birth to this whole thing that like looks at all the plan Bs and all the plan Cs and writes it in a way that everybody can understand. And so when people think like, oh, that's not very interesting to be a lawyer, or maybe not very creative, I'm like, oh, it's just super interesting, because you're telling a story in the document even, and you're thinking through all those pieces.
We're writing law. law between people. It's just figuring out how parties actually put things together. For me, I will tell you, I'll end with this one last thing. I always tell junior attorneys about this. So when I decided to do, the reason why, I do a lot of compliance work, but I do a lot of transactional work. And the thing I like about transactional work, and the reason why I'm not a litigator, is because I always think of transactions and any kind of sort of, it's two people or two parties coming together to create value and to create more value than you would otherwise alone, right? So instead of when 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4, but equals 5 or some exponential number, that's the reason why I like being a transaction lawyer, because I'm able to participate in the creation of that additional value by two parties coming together.
So I feel like we should end on that note, that we're creating value between two parties. I think that couldn't be a better statement. Alice, do you want to jump on real quick and just read the number in case anybody missed it? And then I will just thank everybody for doing this. Thank the Austin Bar, thank Alice and the whole Eslava team, and thank you, Poe, for remotely coming to visit us in Austin. And we keep saying this, you'll come if we give you brisket and barbecue, right? So let us
Looking
know.
forward to it. Fantastic.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. Alice, do you want to jump on and do that?
Yeah. So that we've got the CLE number. It's 174100901. If anybody needs it, just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to provide it if you didn't catch that or didn't catch it at the start. Thank you both so much. This was wonderful. And thanks everybody for joining us.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Poe. Really appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.